Everyone, as you're coming in, if you wouldn't mind muting yourselves. All right, well, hello, and thank you for joining us today for our first Friends of HSF Alumni Speaker Series virtual Q&A of the summer. We are so excited to connect our alumni directly with our students to share their insight on specific topics. Today, we will hear from alumna Maes Espinosa about applying to law school and navigating your first year. Thank you to those of you who submitted questions ahead of time. If you submitted a question today and it goes unanswered, please feel free to submit the question via the chat feature. If time allows, we will be submitting these questions to Maes live. If you are joining us now, we ask that you mute yourselves upon entry. Our student moderator for today is Molly McQueenie. Molly is a fourth-year student from Sarasota, Florida, majoring in economics and social work. Molly is involved with Presidential Scholars, Social Science Scholars, DARASA, and Amnesty International. Thank you for being here, Molly. I'd now like to introduce our guest for this afternoon, Maes Espinosa. Maes graduated from FSU in 2019 with a BS in Political Science and International Affairs and a Bachelor of Arts in English. During Maes' time at FSU, she was involved with the Honor Scholars and Fellows House in various ways. She was in the University Honors and Presidential Scholars Program and also completed the Undergraduate Research Opportunity Program as a freshman. She also worked with the Office of National Fellowships on 2 applications and participated in the Honors Legal Scholars. Outside of the Honor Scholars and Fellows House, Maes was a member of Azucar Dance Company, one of several Latin dance groups on campus. She went to law school straight out of undergrad and just finished her first year at Yale Law School. This summer, Maes will be working as a summer associate at White & Case in Miami, Florida. Thank you for being here, Maes, and I'll now hand it over to Molly.
Thank you so much, Amy, and welcome, Maes. Before we get started, I just want to repeat what Amy said in that last little bit about questions. You can submit a question at any time in the chat to us. Feel free to ask any questions there and we'll do our best to get to them. So I'd like to start by just asking you, Maes, to share very briefly a little bit about your story and your journey through your first year at law school.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm very happy to be here. So my journey to law school, I started thinking about law school back in high school, mostly because the subjects that I enjoyed most and tended to do best in were ones that kind of aligned well with law school. I really liked my English classes, and so generally social studies. And so that's how I started thinking about law school, although you don't have to major in something like that in college to go to law school. And then the first time that I really had any exposure to the legal world was the summer between my sophomore and junior year of high school, when I did a program at Emory University for high school students. It was a pre-law program taught by a professor from Emory Law. And it was the first time I had to read a case. It was the first time that I had to talk about a case in class. And I came away from that experience thinking that I did like law. I did like to study it, the little bit that I learned. And so I came to college with that mindset. And so once at FSU, I tried to find activities that would expose me more to the legal world and also help me confirm that this was what I wanted to do. So I did Honors Legal Scholars, like Amy mentioned. And I also did an internship at a small law firm in South Florida during a summer. And so all of that, continued. I was sure that that was what I wanted to do, that I wanted to go to law school. And so that's why I applied as a senior in college and went straight through. And so my first year of law school has been interesting with COVID. So not at all what anybody could have imagined. But I really like the intellectual challenge. I like the sort of grappling with questions and arguing, not in a combative sense, but more so in, taking apart a question and looking at it from different viewpoints and trying to, think, well, what would I say if I had to argue in favor of this idea or against it? And so I think those are generally good. If that sounds interesting to you, then, law school and the legal profession might be the right path for you.
That was great, Maes. Thank you so much. So I think we're going to get started now with some questions that were submitted to us before this started. So the first one is what matters most in applying to law school aside from the LSAT score?
Okay, we might have lost May for just a second, so hopefully she'll be right back. The joys of virtual events. Let me go ahead and message her to see if she lost her internet connection. Thanks for hanging with us. So she got booted out, so she should be right back on. So we will be right back. In the meantime, if you did not have time to submit a question beforehand, while we wait for May to get back on, if you have any questions that you've been thinking about or that you want to submit to the chat, please do so. And she is coming right back.
There we go. Can you hear me now? Sorry about that. I don't know what happened. Okay, so I'm not sure where you stopped hearing me on what I was saying. So, the question was what matters most besides the LSAT to get into law school in the application process. And so I think that the application process really is holistically. I don't think that there's one thing that across the board is a deal maker or deal breaker in terms of getting in somewhere. I had a really strong GPA, for example, but my LSAT was not amazing. I mean, it was good, but it wasn't like super, super high. So I was well below the median in some schools, including Yale. So, that's proof that you don't have to check every box entirely. I think you should put forth the best application you can and be mindful about every aspect, be thoughtful about how you write your resume, but at the time that you apply, everything is pretty locked in. Your grades are pretty locked in, your LSAT score, you shouldn't lie in your resume, so that's kind of locked in also. The thing that you have the most control over are your essays, and that's a space where you can really shine if there's anything else that's a little bit deficient that you can't, you don't really have time to fix. So focusing on your essays and being really mindful about what you write and how you write it can really help. And they do pay attention to them because I got several handwritten notes on my acceptance letters commenting on my essays. So it really does matter. They're not just sort of waving them off. So that's not to say that you can sort of slack off and write a really good essay and still get in. I think you should be mindful about everything. But at the time that you're actually going to start applying, the essays are really, I think, the part where you can really shine if there's anything else that's maybe not as strong.
That's great. Thank you, May. Our next question is, how did you study for the LSAT? And which resources did you use? And maybe most importantly, how did you stay motivated to study for the LSAT?
Yeah, so I took the LSAT twice. And the first time I took it, which was the longest I studied, I did a course with Test Masters, which was at the time offered in person at the FSU Law School. I'm not sure how COVID has changed that for any of you who are planning to study for the LSAT soon. I studied over the course of my junior spring. And for most people who are applying, who plan to apply as a college senior, that's generally when they study for the LSAT and then they take it that summer. That's totally fine. So I did the test or the course with Test Masters. And I found that was helpful in helping me stay motivated because I had twice a week a physical session, a physical class that I had to attend. And I had, and there were exercises online that I can sort of as homework. Nobody really checked it, but obviously the incentive is there for you to improve and practice. So I think a course is a good way to stay organized and stay motivated because you get whether you do one in person or you do it fully online, which is another option, it helps you, it gives you a roadmap, and there are stages that you complete. And so it helps you keep track of your progress and sort of work through the process. I will say that so the second time I studied, and it was a lot shorter. I studied for maybe like 2.5 weeks before I took it the second time, mostly as a review. I used the Khan Academy free prep, like online course. It's not really a course in the sense that like you don't really get like a lecture, or at least I didn't use it that way, but there are videos that you can watch of people, like the instructors working through the problems. But it's good in that it like calibrates to your, like what you're doing well and what you're not doing well. And you can put in how long you have to study, what score you want to get. And so it's a little bit more personalized than just studying on your own with the book, which I think is probably the hardest thing to do to stay motivated. And the Khan Academy is completely free. So that's a really good resource if like the cost of a course is a little prohibitive.
That's great, thank you. And then you touched a little bit on this when you said with your, your LSAT score and your GPA and everything in question 1, but generally how competitive is the admissions process? Yeah,
the admissions process is pretty competitive. Specifics vary by school. Some of the T14, or I would say most, if not all of the T14 schools probably have 20% or less acceptance rate. Some of them will have 15% or less. And there are a couple that have less than 10, which is probably as low as it gets. So that's, it's hard to get into those schools. They're the T14 for a reason. But I would use the acceptance rates as a way to sort of spread out your applications. You probably heard this advice when you were applying to undergrad as a high schooler. Hedge your bets, apply to some like safety schools, to some sort of mid-level schools, to some reach schools. I think that's good advice, not only in terms of like maximizing your chances of getting in somewhere, but also because some of the like lower, even within the T14, some maybe like 6 to 14 and even lower ranked schools will give scholarships just on the basis of your application, and you can use that to negotiate with other schools. Doesn't always work, but sometimes it does. And so it can be helpful to apply to schools where you're really sure that you're going to get in, or pretty sure that you're going to get in, because that probably means you might get some scholarship money. I wouldn't use the acceptance rate of a school to judge the amount of effort you should put into your application. One, because you never know how things are going to work out. You might end up not getting in somewhere you thought you would and getting in somewhere you never thought you would. And also because you reuse a lot of the same application materials, like your essays you generally send, at least your personal statement, you send to pretty much every school with some caveats. If the school has any certain, specific directions, then definitely read those and change it. But generally the personal statement and your resume, you can send to pretty much any school. So you shouldn't, it doesn't make sense to kind of slack off on one application because that school has a higher acceptance rate.
For our next question, do you recommend going straight to law school from undergrad, or do you think there is value in taking time off of school to work or do something else before going to law school? Obviously, you've gone straight to law school from graduate.
Yeah. So I think this is much more of a personal choice than it is necessarily a strategic choice. I went to law school, as you know, straight through from undergrad. The reason for that is that I knew that I wanted to go to law school. I didn't feel like I needed to take time off to think about that choice. And I also felt like I was prepared for that environment. People take time off for any number of reasons. And you can either defer, which means that you apply, you choose a school, and once you commit to that school, you communicate to them that you will be starting in a year's time. Or some people just finish undergrad, work, or do something else for a number of years and then apply. So either option is, in the end, you end up taking time off. But the reason why people don't go, or some of the reasons why people don't go straight through, are that they don't know that they want to go to law school. They're not sure. They need time to think about, their career path. And so they don't apply as an undergrad or as a senior. Even though they know that they want to go to law school, they're feeling a little bit burned out from undergrad. And so they'd rather work or do something else for a year or more as a break. Or some people, again, they know that they want to go to law school, but there's something else they want to do first. And so, for example, I applied to the Rhodes Scholarship. I didn't get it, but had I gotten it, I would have done that in between, and so would not have gone straight through. So that's an option. I have friends in now who did similar programs, Fulbright, or, I have friends who did Teach for America or Peace Corps, those kinds of programs. People will apply sometimes as an undergrad to law school and to those programs. If they get in, they'll do the year of that program, defer for a year at law school, and then go. I've also heard from some, from people who went straight through or didn't, that they felt their choice was either good or bad, depending on the level of professional experience they had. So I did an internship every summer in undergrad, and I felt like I was ready to go to professional school. I had a taste of what it's like to work in a professional environment. I've heard from people, oh, I didn't have that, and I kind of regret going straight through because I felt a little bit like a fish out of water at my first summer job in law school. So it's really, I think it's a personal choice. I don't think that there's anything that you necessarily need to do before law school to prepare. I don't think that there's anything that will give you or give anyone an absolutely crucial leg up in law school. It's a very different game than anything you've done before academically. And so you will learn what you need to once you're there. But if any of what the reasons I've said for deferring, or even others, sometimes you defer for personal reasons, or take time off for personal reasons, resonate with you, then, feel free to take time off. I don't think it'll, necessarily hurt you either way.
Thank you, May. That was a great response. So for our next question, it's what challenges did you face when applying to a top school like Yale? And what advice do you have for students who are aiming to get into a top school as well?
Yeah, so I think the biggest challenge is not necessarily specific to Yale or other top schools. It's just a matter of it's just sort of the fact of the matter when it comes to law school applications. The process is long. There are moving pieces, lots of moving pieces. And for most people, you are doing law school applications at the same time that you're doing something else, a full-time job or a full-time student, career. And so that was the case for me. I had a full course load my senior year at the same time that I was applying to law school. So, there was a lot of sort of time management and juggling and the stresses that inevitably come with that. So I think the key there is just to be organized, start early as much as you can. You can knock out your essays and your resume during the summer, or at least your personal statement. So I think that helps. And then stay organized, come up with a checklist or a chart, whatever, if you work best on paper or on the computer, whatever works for you, but keep track of what you have to do, the deadlines for that, what you've already done, so that nothing falls through the cracks, or at least you minimize the chances of something slipping through the cracks and hurting your chances of getting in. I think some of the other challenges of applying to top schools specifically were more self-perceived than real. I applied to Yale and other top schools because I was didn't want to wonder what if, but I never thought I was going to get in. I felt like I had a really good undergrad career, like I had a good resume, a good GPA, but they're top schools that are really, really hard to get into. I don't know how many people apply and oh, I absolutely am going to get in. I don't know how many people think that I certainly didn't. And I was worried too. I was like, well, how many people are going to applying to Yale and to Harvard, from Yale and Harvard and all these other Ivy Leagues, and I'm coming from a public state school. How well can I compete? And you can. There are certainly a lot of, Ivy League and other sort of prestigious school alumni at Yale now that are my classmates, but there are also a lot of other, students from other schools that are, like FSU. So don't let that deter you. I think, again, the best advice I can give you is just work hard on your application, take time to do it. I think being organized helps with that because it makes, it helps you make sure that you have enough time to dedicate to your application, and just send in the best product that you can.
Our next question is, do you think there are any significant benefits to double majoring in terms of applying to law school?
Yeah, I don't think it can hurt. Absolutely not. I think it definitely, it shows good things. I don't think if you don't double major, I don't think it shows any bad things, but if you do double major, I think it shows the good things. It shows that you're more well-rounded because you've studied in depth more than one subject. So you have a wider knowledge base. And it also shows that you're a hard worker academically, that you can meet academic challenges, because it's generally harder to carry two majors or to juggle the course load that comes with two majors as opposed to one. And law school is a lot of work. It's not, I don't know how many of you have heard these horror stories about law school. I certainly did when I was in your shoes. I don't think in my personal experience that they're all true, but you do work really hard. It is definitely doable, but it is a lot of work, and the legal profession overall is just a lot of work. So I think the fact that you're juggling two majors and especially if you do it successfully, it shows that you're dedicated, you can handle tough workload, which will serve you well.
You mentioned a little bit earlier how your personal statement and the essays in general were so crucial to your application and applications overall. So how did you go about writing your personal statement?
Yeah, so I actually wrote an entire personal statement the summer before my senior year, and then once the semester started, scrapped it and wrote a complete new one. And I was so stressed when that happened, but it worked out fine. So you will be okay. The draft that I ended up submitting, I actually, I guess I should back up. So the first draft I wrote, or the first essay, because I thought it was pretty finished, was like a longer version of my resume. And I was trying to write, and I think what you should write in these essays is, why do you want to go to law school? Why would you be a good law student? Why should a school want to accept you? And it's probably not a good strategy to answer that question directly, to say like, I want to go to law school because X, Y, and Z, and you should accept me because A, B, C. But you can tell a story about yourself that the message it gives to the reader at, when they finish is they get from this essay why you want to go to law school and why they should accept you. And so I wrote essentially a longer version of my resume, because I came to college wanting to go to law school. I didn't change my mind over the course of college. And so a lot of my resume was sort of tied to me wanting to go to law school and preparing for that. And so I wrote more about that in the essay, which was not particularly exciting. And the idea for the essay that I actually wrote came from an event kind of like this one, where it was a school one of the schools that I was applying to held like a webinar like this with their current students, a couple of their current students, and it was a Q&A for like applicants to ask what, about the application process and what it's like to be a law student. And the topic of essays came up, and one of the panelists who answered, she sort of gave the same advice, like, you're writing about why you want to go to law school, but you don't have to answer that directly. Like, you can write about anything you want. And I wrote about learning French, and that stuck with me for some reason. And I thought about it, and I was like, I speak French too, and I've learned it as a second language, and I really enjoy it. I love learning languages, and I was an English major in undergrad, and I was like, I really do like languages, and I like to read. And I thought about it, and I was like, honestly, that's a really big reason why I want to go to law school and why I want to be a lawyer and why this profession fits with me, with my interests and my skills, because it's so much about language and about writing and reading, and I like doing that, and I think I'm good at it. And so I ended up writing about that. I wrote about how language and literature are really important to me, and why that's sort of the culmination of like all these experiences. I wrote about like the first book I ever read on my own when I was like 6 years old, and I wrote about learning French and studying abroad and being an English major, and my thesis, and then I ended it by essentially saying like the culmination of all of this is like me wanting to go to law school. This is why I want to go. So I think that's a very long answer, but I think the first step of writing an essay is a lot of self-reflection and of asking yourself, like, why do I want to go to law school? What about the legal profession interests me? Why is this what I'm choosing? When I think about my career, and this changes obviously, but at least now, you know, what do you see and why is law school essential to that? And, you know, why should a school accept me? So, you know, what can I tell somebody who's deciding whether to accept me to a law school about myself? What can I tell that person about myself that's going to want to make them accept me? That's going to, you know, when they finish reading this essay, they're going to say, yes, I want this person in my school. And so everybody has their own story and their own answer to that question. And it's, you know, this is much, much easier said than done, but it's writing your personal statement is a matter of putting that into words. I hope that was helpful. That was a very long answer.
I think that's a really helpful response. Thank you, May. For the next one, it's at what point did you find the area of law that you want to practice?
Yeah, I still am figuring it out. And that is totally fine. And you don't need to, you know, you don't need to have a very specific area of law that you want to practice. You might have an interest now for whatever reason. I started thinking about corporate law, which is my sort of broad interest, when I did an internship at a law firm here in South Florida, which is where I'm from, one of my summers in undergrad. And they did corporate work, and I thought it was interesting. And so I came to law school with sort of that background, but not, and by any means, you know, tied to that. And I'm hoping to explore this summer during I'm working as a summer associate at a law firm here in Miami. And so I'm hoping to explore different areas of law. And so you can certainly talk about in your application or in an interview if you have one, you know, you might get asked like, you know, what kind of law do you want to practice? Do you know? And 9 times out of 10, even now, as having finished my first year, when I get that question from from lawyers, they usually follow it up with, it's totally fine if you don't, like, you don't have to. And I get the sense that if you say very specifically, like, oh yes, I absolutely know that I want to do like white collar, they might be a little skeptical because practice is really, really different from even law school. And so it's hard to know. And in fact, a lot of the like big law firms that do a lot of different practices of law, or like practice a lot of areas of law, they have like rotation programs for their recent hires. So when they hire students right out of law school, instead of like, you spend your first year and a half, sometimes even up to 2 years, rotating in between 2 or 3 different areas of practice before you figure out, you settle down into the one that you're going to do. So even when you finish law school and take the bar, you're still not expected to really like have a definitive answer. It's great if you do by that point, but you're not expected to. So that's hopefully that. If you're worried about that, don't be.
This next question you touched on a little bit in a previous question too, but maybe if you could provide a little bit of specifics or something. For someone interested in T14 schools, what would be your biggest piece of advice for being a competitive applicant? Because so many others are coming from more prestigious or highly ranked schools.
Yeah, so I think, again, don't let the fact that you go to FSU deter you from applying. But I think, again, I've said this and I feel like, I don't know how helpful this is, but I really do mean it when I say put forth the best application you can. And so that's, a lot of the application will sort of be just like, your personal information, but the things that you really like, I guess like the meat of the application are your LSAT score, your GPA or your transcript, your resume, your essays, and your letters of recommendation. And so be mindful about all of those. Be thoughtful about how you go about those. So, your GPA is just your hard work during the school year over the course of your undergrad career. So focus on your classes, do well. That's not specific to going to law school, but just in general. And that's something that you should do over the course of your undergrad career, but that's a really big focus your freshman and sophomore year. if there are any freshmen and sophomores out there, focus on your grades to start out with. If you want, like, I'll give you a roadmap of like what to do each year to, if you want to go to law school. The biggest thing you can do freshman, sophomore year is focus on your grades, and you should do that always, but it's good to have a foundation, because if there's one class that you take and it's really hard and you don't do as well, or if you have a really rough semester for some reason, it's good to have a solid foundation. It's hard to turn around a not great GPA junior or senior year. It's hard to really make a difference at that point. Also focus on your extracurriculars, your summer activities. Find things that you're interested in doing that will be valuable to you. I think quality over quantity here. Focus on things that matter to you, that you are excited about, and rather than what you think will look best on a resume. I was really, really involved with the dance group that Amy mentioned with Azucar. And that was one of my main extracurricular activities. Absolutely nothing related to law school. You don't need dance to go to law school, but it was like, I really enjoyed it, and I had wonderful friends in it. It was a great community. And I have a lot of fun memories from being in that organization in undergrad. And so I think that's what matters more than is this like a really shiny line on my resume. So that's, I think, the key for freshman and sophomore year, and that all, eventually all ends up in your transcript and your resume. Then your junior year, you start thinking about the application process itself. So do your research on law school, on LSAT prep, decide what you want to do, study for it, take it, keep up with your grades, your extracurriculars, all of that. I forgot to mention earlier, but also on the point of like working hard in your classes, that's a good way to build a relationship with professors who are eventually going to be your recommenders. That comes a lot more easily if you're interested in the subjects that you're taking, because you're more likely to participate in class. You're excited to go to office hours and ask the professor to talk more about, this topic because you're genuinely interested in it. And then your senior year, you're working on your applications, obviously. And that just, it's a matter of polish, having a really good resume, not just in terms of the content, but in how you format it, how you write it, asking professors that know you to write you recommendation letters that really do know you. And then, working on your essays, working on your preparing for any interviews you might have. And so I think, it's a long process. I think the best advice I can give you is just be honest in your application. Write about things that you care about, that you're excited about, because it'll show through your it's a much easier to write an essay. We're talking an interview about an organization or a class you took that you love than it is to write about something that you hate. And it'll show, it'll come through in your writing and in your interviews. Yeah.
Thank
I
you.
hope that answered the question.
I think it was a great response. I think we're only going to have 2 questions left now. So the first one is, what's it actually like to be a law student? Do most people work and study on their own, or is it more of a cohesive group?
Yeah, that, and then I guess I'll talk about like being a law school in general. The studying is, again, a personal choice. I do a little bit of both. So I do, I generally study, so for the traditional law school classes, like the lectures, your homework is to read the cases that you're going to cover in the following class. So your homework is to prepare for the class that's coming up. So I try to always read on my own. Depending on the class and on how my time works out, I try to do my own outlines, which are called briefs, for the cases. So I outline the cases that I read, but I also join notes groups. So with more than one person or just one person. So my fall semester, through my small group, which is just like you get assigned to a small group and you have all your classes with that group of people. Your first semester or your first year, depending on the school. We had a notes group going for all of our classes, and so we broke up the lectures, and everybody was responsible for a group of them. And so when it was like your day to do the notes, you would prepare reading notes in advance of that class. And so that was really helpful if, if I was really busy and couldn't do the reading or couldn't do my own notes, I had that there. And it was also good to have like an additional set of notes to study from when it came time for exams. And then spring semester, one of my close friends that I met in the fall, she and I took we had the 2 lecture classes that I had with her. So we worked on notes together. So it depends on your preference. And then when it comes time to studying for exams, I also study partly on my own, partly with people, mostly on my own. I try to do, well, it depends. So depending on the class again, I try to do for some classes, I'll do an outline all on my own. So the biggest part of studying for exams in law school is making an outline of the course, which you then use when you take the exam as like a very long cheat sheet. Like my outlines are like 50, 70 pages long, but they're very, very long. But you have all the cases, or you should have all the cases that you covered on there, so it's easy to reference and write about them in the exam. And I can talk more about law school exams if anybody has specific questions about that. But anyway, so depending on the class, I'll either make my outline on my own completely from scratch, I'll use one that somebody else has made and like update it, or I'll collaborate with people and we'll do a group of like 5 people or 3 people or however many there are, and we'll break up the outline by sections, and each person is responsible for making one of their section, and then we like put it all together. And then, so that's the biggest part of studying. And then I'll do practice tests, and I'll do some on my own, and I like to do them on my own first. And then I'll do some with people where we'll like either talk through the entire exam together, or we'll like outline the answers to the exam and then like share notes essentially. So it depends on what works for you. And especially your first semester, I recommend trying out different things. Like judge based on your class and how comfortable you feel with the material, but maybe try studying completely on your own for a class, or try studying with other people for another class, and find what works best for you. And then more broadly, I think law school in terms of like your time management and things like that has a lot in common with college, that you have maybe like 2 or 3 classes depending on your schedule per day. And then you sort of have like bigger blocks of time in between. And so it's just a matter of like organizing, managing your time effectively. The academic experience is very different. The way that classes are taught is different. And so that takes a little bit of getting used to. Yeah, I think that's just, there's a learning curve to law school, and your professors know this. And even though you might think that they're not taking that into account in the way that they teach and like their expectations of you, they are available, I think, generally to answer questions. And so, and you'll get plugged into a lot of resources once you get to law school that'll help you. So, yeah.
Thank you, May. Should you consider attending a law school only in the location that you want to practice?
Not only. I think it's definitely helpful to apply to places near where you want to practice. It could be in the same city, the same state, or just the general region. But you should feel free to branch out, especially if you're applying to higher ranked schools. So the T14 schools are pretty versatile geographically because they have pretty wide, like geographically wide alumni networks. So they, in terms of their the places that recruit from those schools are also like pretty highly ranked schools. So most workplaces across the country will want students from those schools. So you can work pretty much anywhere. Like I have a lot of friends, for example, who are from California originally, or who want to work in California, who go to Yale. And so now this summer they're going back to California. I have a friend who's from Pennsylvania originally. She goes to Yale Law. And she's working in Hawaii this summer. So like complete opposite end of the country. So that's very versatile. And I'm sure students at Berkeley and Stanford are doing the same. They're going to schools there, but they're coming to New York to work or whatever. So I think the higher ranked the school, the more geographic diversity or sort of flexibility you have. So that's another way to sort of spread out your applications and make sure that you're applying places that'll let you sort of move around if that's what you want, or apply and also apply to places where you want to practice. And you can look this up online. Schools publish information about where their students go to work, and they'll rank like by percentages, like the most common states where their students end up working. So you can look that up. And see if those schools are sending students places where you might want to go.
I'm now going to switch over to some questions that were asked in the chat. Our
Yep.
first one is, so you've touched a lot on extracurriculars throughout, as well as the resume process. Were there any clubs or organizations that you joined just for the sake of boosting your resume that later turned out to not help you as much as others in terms of law school acceptance?
That's a good question. I'm not sure if I joined anything only because I wanted it on my resume. I think there are some things I joined that, well, like, okay. I think there are some things that you can join that aren't quite as active. So like honor societies, for example, like they're a good thing to have on your resume. Again, it shows that you're, you know, that you have a certain level of academic excellence. They're not quite as active as some other extracurriculars, but they certainly do look good on a resume. So if you have the opportunity to join one, then you definitely should. I don't think that I had any like major disappointments with my extracurriculars in undergrad. I think that it's maybe, I think it should be, if you're looking to join something, and I think it's a good combination. If you're thinking about how it's going to look on your resume, you should probably also think about what you're going to get out of it. Because if you have interviews, most interviewers, whether it's an admissions officer or an alumni, especially if they're an alumni, the only thing they will have in front of them is your resume, and they will go through it and ask you questions about it. And so you should be prepared to talk about, as a general tip also for interviews, you should be prepared to talk about anything that's on your resume. But if they ask you about something that you kind of joined because you thought it would look good on your resume and it turned out to be not so great, and they ask you about it and you don't have a great answer, like it probably doesn't look very good. So I think more than, you know, I think the biggest thing to think about when you're joining extracurriculars is the value that it's going to give you generally, whether it's, you know, professional value. So I joined Honors Legal Scholars because it was a great way to get exposed to law school and the legal world. And so that's maybe something that looks really shiny on a resume. But I also joined the dance club, and I enjoyed that a lot. And that maybe doesn't look as fancy on a resume as some other activities, but I got a lot out of it personally. So I think it's a combination of, if you're thinking about how it looks on your resume, it shouldn't be the only consideration. You should, you know, spend your time, you know, be thoughtful about how you're spending your time, not just a line that it's gonna, you know, that you're gonna type in your resume eventually.
So for another question, do you have any quick tips for first-year law students that you wish you knew before your first year, or opportunities that you recommend while in law school?
Yeah, so I think two things I wish I knew, I guess. One is, this is very practical advice. I actually got this piece of advice, but I didn't really understand it until I went through it. But studying for class or preparing for class is different than studying for exams. And I'll try to explain it as quickly as I can. When you prepare for class, if you've heard of like the dreaded cold calls, which is when the professor like just calls on somebody and asks them a question directly, a lot of times you will need to know, depending on the professor, specific details about the case. So you'll, you know, and so when you do your outlines for class and you prepare for class, you're going to have a lot of sort of minute details about the case. When you're studying for exams, you care about the big picture, about what does this case say about the law. And so sometimes when you're in class and you're writing notes, you get really caught up with the small details, which can come in handy for when you're studying for exams. And sometimes, like, I found myself writing down a lot of small details, especially my earlier notes when I was studying for finals the first time in the fall, and missing sort of like, what's the ruling, what's the holding, what does this case stand for? And then having to sort of like dig through other sources to find that. So I think, you know, I think that's something I wish I knew. I think I did well in my exams overall, but that would have made studying easier, and it helped. I felt like I took more effective notes spring semester because of that, and that's something that you just get from experience. I think something else more broadly, though, that I wish I knew is that I had everything I needed to start law school when I started. So I didn't regret not, you know, I wasn't second guessing or didn't regret not taking time off the summer between undergrad and law school, but I was a little anxious about sort of finding my feet in law school. I was ready to work really hard, but I was worried about sort of keeping up with my peers and my classmates, and how well could I participate in class, and would it be really obvious that I was straight through, because I just didn't have the same kind of like professional experience that, you know, I have classmates who have worked for 5 years or more. And that has not been true. And so I think law school is a learning curve, and there are things about sort of your pre-law school life that can help you, but I don't think that there's anything absolutely critical other than perhaps just general professional experience that is like really, really, you know, just if you don't have it, you're dead kind of thing. Like there's nothing that's like, if you're missing it, it's a death sentence. So I think, you know, if you're going straight through, especially, I think just, you know, I know it's, you know, it's an anxiety inducing experience, and sort of, you know, law school is difficult, and always, you know, when you're starting something new and unknown, it can get a little nerve wracking, but you'll be okay, and have confidence in yourself. If a school is accepting you, then, you know, most schools have a lot of people to choose from. So if they're picking you to go, then they're pretty confident that you have what it takes. The flip side of that is, don't take it personally if you get, you know, rejection letters, as disappointing as it is. It's not a reflection on you as a person. So yeah.
Thank you, May. And then for our last question for today, do all schools interview you at some point for law school admission?
Good question. No. Each school has their own interview policy, and you can usually find those online through the like admissions website. So some schools don't interview at all. Yale is one of them. Some schools do like essentially a two-step application process, where the first step, you apply online, and then they pick a pool of students to interview. And from those who are interviewed, they pick the ones that will be accepted. So you, like, essentially you have to interview to be admitted, but you have to be invited to interview. You cannot request that. That's how Harvard works. So if you don't get an interview invitation from Harvard, then you won't get in. Essentially, some schools interview kind of for different reasons, in the sense that, like, maybe, you know, they don't have quite as clear of a policy about why they're interviewing you. Some schools might interview you because you're kind of on the brink of getting in, and they're not quite sure based on your paper application, and so they interview you to see if that's going to push you over the edge. Some schools might love your online application and just want to learn more about you before they officially let you in. And for most schools, I think you have to wait to be invited to interview. You cannot request an interview. Although for some schools you can. I think Vanderbilt is one where you can check off like a box on your online application if you'd like to be interviewed, and then they will eventually contact you. So each school has their own sort of little rule book on that, and you can find that information online. And I'll say also, there are a lot of schools will host sort of events like this one, where they'll have Q&A either with their current students or with members of the admissions team. So that's a good question to ask. Is, you know, what advice do you have for interviews? How should we, you know, if we don't get an interview is a bad thing, like phrase it nicely, but essentially you can ask about interviews. That's a good question to bring up if you have the chance to participate in an event like that.
Awesome. Thank you so much, May. And thank you, Molly, for moderating. But May, I think all of that was wonderful, and I'm sure the participants took a lot from it. If we did not answer a question today, if you think of one later and you really want it answered, please feel free to email me. I have put my email address in the chat, and I will make sure to connect with May and to get that answered. Also, if you logged on late or wanted to rewatch to catch an answer, this recording will be posted on our Friends of HSF Facebook and YouTube starting tomorrow. Both links to both of those sites are also in the chat. I also wanted to share that Pre-Law FSU, the link for Pre-Law FSU is in the chat. They offer support to FSU students and alumni as they move through the law school application and preparation process as well. So if you want to meet with a pre-law advisor or join the pre-law listserv and explore other resources, you can do so following the link in the chat. Lastly, before we conclude, I want to let those of you here today know if you're an undergraduate student about the undergraduate opportunities that we offer in the Honor Scholars and Fellows House. So to learn more about completing an honors in the major thesis, expanding your academic engagement, and acquire skills essential in a globalizing world through the Undergraduate Research Opportunity Program, IDEA grants, Global Scholars, Tech Fellows, or about exploring the competitive application process by connecting with the Office of National Fellowships, you can follow the link that I had provided in the chat that will take you to HSF to learn about those opportunities. Lastly, be sure to keep an eye out on our social media for our next speaker series, which will be July 29th at 3 p.m. We're going to be featuring alumna Bethany Swanson, and she will be discussing how the Florida Department of Education has worked to support our education system during COVID and guidance on ways that we can use the CARES Act for the benefit of our students. So that'll be a real timely one before we head back to classes in the fall. But thank you again for joining us today, and we hope to see you in the future. And thanks, May. Thank you, Molly, and hope everyone stays safe. Bye.